A trade route is a logistical network identified as a series of pathways and stoppages used for the commercial transport of cargo. The term can also be used to refer to trade over bodies of water, allowing goods to reach distant markets. A single trade route contains long-distance arteries, which may further be connected to smaller networks of commercial and non-commercial transportation routes. Among notable trade routes was the Amber Road, which served as a dependable network for long-distance trade. Maritime trade along the spice route became prominent during the Middle Ages, when nations resorted to military means for control of this influential route. During the Middle Ages, organizations such as the Hanseatic League aimed at protecting interests of the merchants, and trade became increasingly prominent. In modern times, commercial activity shifted from the major trade routes of the Old World to newer routes between modern nation-states. This activity was sometimes carried out without traditional protection of trade and under international free trade agreements, which allowed commercial goods to cross borders with relaxed restrictions. Innovative transportation of modern times includes pipeline transport and the relatively well-known trade involving rail routes, automobiles, and cargo airlines. Development of early routes. Early development. The period from the middle of the second millennium BCE to the beginning of the Common Era saw societies in Western Asia, the Mediterranean, China and the Indian subcontinent develop major transportation networks for trade. One of the vital instruments which facilitated long-distance trade was portage and the domestication of beasts of burden. Organized caravans, visible by the second millennium BCE, could carry goods across a large distance as fodder was mostly available along the way. The domestication of camels allowed Arabian nomads to control the long-distance trade in spices and silk from the Far East to the Arabian Peninsula. Caravans were useful in long-distance trade largely for carrying luxury goods. The transportation of cheaper goods across large distances was not profitable for caravan operators. With productive developments in iron and bronze technologies, newer trade routes, dispensing innovations of civilizations, began to rise. Maritime trade. Evidence of maritime trade between civilizations dates back at least 90 millennia. Navigation was known in Sumer between the 4th and the 3rd millennium BCE, and was probably known by the Indians and the Chinese people before the Sumerians. The Egyptians had trade routes through the Red Sea, importing spices from the land of Punt and from Arabia. Maritime trade began with safer coastal trade and evolved with the manipulation of the monsoon winds, soon resulting in trade crossing boundaries such as the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. South Asia had multiple maritime trade routes which connected it to Southeast Asia, thereby making the control of one route resulting in maritime monopoly difficult. Indian connections to various Southeast Asian states buffered it from blockages on other routes. By making use of the maritime trade routes, bulk commodity trade became possible for the Romans in the 2nd century BCE. A Roman trading vessel could span the Mediterranean in a month at 1/60th the cost of overland routes. Visible trade routes. The peninsula of Anatolia lay on the commercial land routes to Europe from Asia as well as the sea route from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. Records from the 19th century BCE attest to the existence of an Assyrian merchant colony at Kanesh in Cappadocia. Trading networks of the Old World included the Trunk Road of India and the Incense Road of Arabia. A transportation network consisted consisting of hard-surfaced highways using concrete made from volcanic ash and lime, was built by the Romans as early as 312 BCE, during the times of the censor Appius Claudius Caecus. Parts of the Mediterranean world, Roman Britain, Tigris-Euphrates river system and North Africa fell under the reach of this network at some point of their history. According to Robert Allen Denmark, the spread of urban trading networks, and their extension along the Persian Gulf and eastern Mediterranean, created a complex molecular structure of regional foci so that as well as the zonation of core and periphery there was a series of interacting civilizations: Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, then also Syria, Central Anatolia and the Aegean. Beyond this was a margin which included not only temperate areas such as Europe, but the dry steppe corridor of Central Asia. This was truly a world system, even though it occupied only a restricted portion of the West and Old World. Whilst each civilization emphasized its ideological autonomy, all were identifiably part of a common world of interacting components. These routes, spreading religion, trade and technology, have historically been vital to the growth of urban civilization, the extent of development of cities, and the level of their integration into a larger world system, has often been attributed to the position in various active transport networks. Historic trade routes. Combined land and waterway routes. Incense route. The incense route served as a channel for trading of Indian, Arabian and East Asian goods. The incense trade flourished from South Arabia to the Mediterranean between roughly the 3rd century BCE to the 2nd century CE. This trade was crucial to the economy of Yemen, and the frankincense and arteries were seen as a source of wealth by its rulers. Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, emperor of Ptolemaic Egypt, may have forged an alliance with the Lihyanites in order to secure the incense route at Dedan, thereby rerouting the incense trade from Dedan to the coasts along the Red Sea to Egypt. I.e., S. Edwards connects the Syro-Ephraimite war to the desire of the Israelites and the Arameans to control the northern end of the incense route, which ran up from southern Arabia and could be tapped by commanding Transjordan. Gerrha, inhabited by Chaldean exiles from Babylon, controlled the incense trade routes across Arabia to the Mediterranean and exercised control over the trading of aromatics to Babylon in the 1st century BCE. The Nabateans exercised control over the routes along the incense route, and the hold was challenged, without success, by Antigonus Cyclops, emperor of Syria. The Nabatean control over trade further increased and spread in many directions. The replacement of Greece by the Roman Empire as the administrator of the Mediterranean basin led to the resumption of direct trade with the East, and the elimination of the taxes extracted previously by the middlemen of the South. According to Milo Kearney, the South Arabs in protest took to pirate attacks over the Roman ships in the Gulf of Aden. In response, the Romans destroyed Aden and favored the western Abyssinian coast of the Red Sea. Indian ships sailed to Egypt as the maritime routes of southern Asia were not under the control of a single power. Pre-Columbian trade. Some similarities between the Mesoamerican and the Andean cultures suggest that the two regions became a part of a wider world system as a result of trade. By the 1st millennium BCE, the current academic view is that the flow of goods across the Andean slopes was controlled by institutions distributing locations to local groups, who were then free to access them for trading. This trade across the Andean slopes, described sometimes as vertical trade, may have overshadowed the long-distance trade between the people of the Andes and the neighboring forests. The Kalawaya herbalists traded in tropical plants between 6th and 10th centuries, while copper was dealt by specialized merchants in the Peruvian valley of Chincha. Long-distance trade may have seen local elites resorting to struggle in order for manipulation and control. Prior to the Inca dominance, specialized long-distance merchants provided the highlanders with goods such as gold nuggets, copper hatchets, cocoa, salt etc. for redistribution among the locals, and were key players in the politics of the region. Hatchet-shaped copper currency was produced by the Peruvian people in order to obtain valuables from pre-Columbian Ecuador. A maritime exchange system stretched from the west coast of Mexico to southernmost Peru, trading mostly in spondylus, which represented rain and fertility and was considered the principal food of the gods by the people of the Inca Empire. Spondylus was used in elite rituals, and the effective redistribution of it had political effect in the Andes during the pre-Hispanic times. Predominantly overland routes. Silk Road. The Silk Road was one of the first trade routes to join the Eastern and the Western worlds. According to Vadim Alisif, along the Silk Roads, technology traveled, ideas were exchanged, and friendship and understanding between East and West were experienced for the first time on a large scale. Easterners were exposed to Western ideas and lifestyles, and Westerners too learned about Eastern culture and its spirituality-oriented cosmology. Buddhism as an Eastern religion received international attention through the Silk Roads. Cultural interactions, patronized often by powerful emperors, such as Kanishka, led to development of art due to introduction of a rich variety of influences. Buddhist missions thrived along the Silk Roads, partly due to the conducive intermixing of trade and cultural values, which created a series of safe stoppages for both the pilgrims and the traders. Among the frequented routes of the Silk Route was the Burmese route extending from Bhamo, which served as a path for Marco Polo's visit to Yunnan and Indian Buddhist missions to Canton in order to establish Buddhist monasteries. This route, often under the presence of hostile tribes, also finds mention in the works of Rashid al-Din Hamadani. Her trunk road, the Grand Trunk Road, connecting Chittagong in Bangladesh to Peshawar in Pakistan, has existed for over 2.5 millennia. One of the important trade routes of the world, this road has been a strategic artery with fortresses, halting posts, wells, post offices, milestones and other facilities. Part of this road through Pakistan also coincided with the Silk Road. This highway has been associated with Emperors Chandragupta Maurya and Shah Suri. The latter became synonymous with this route due to his role in ensuring the safety of the travelers and the upkeep of the road. Emperor Shah widened and realigned the road to other routes, and provided approximately 1,700 roadside inns through his empire. These inns provided free food and lodgings to the travelers regardless of the status. The British occupation of this road was of special significance for the British Raj in India. Bridges, pathways and newer inns were constructed by the British for the first 37 years of the reign since the occupation of Punjab in 1849. The British followed roughly the same alignment as the old routes, and at some places the newer routes ran parallel to the older routes. The Vadim Ilisif comments on the Grand Trunk Road. Along this road marched not only the mighty armies of conquerors, but also the caravans of traders, scholars, artists, and common folk. Together with people, moved ideas, languages, customs, and cultures, not just in one, but in both directions. At different meeting places, permanent as well as temporary, people of different origins and from different cultural backgrounds, professing different faiths and creeds, eating different foods, wearing different clothes, and speaking different languages and dialects would meet one another peacefully. They would understand one another's food, dress, manner, and etiquette, and even borrow words, phrases, idioms, and, at times, whole languages from others. Amber Road. The Amber Road was a European trade route associated with the trade and transport of amber. Amber satisfied the criteria for long-distance trade as it was light in weight and was in high demand for ornamental purposes around the Mediterranean. Before the establishment of Roman control over areas such as Pannonia, the Amber Road was virtually the only route available for long-distance trade. Towns along the Amber Road began to rise steadily during the 1st century CE, despite the troop movements under Titus Flavius Vespasianus and his son Titus Flavius Domitianus. Under the reign of Tiberius Caesar Augustus, the Amber Road was straightened and paved according to the prevailing urban standards. Roman towns began to appear along the road, initially founded near the site of Celtic Oppida. The 3rd century saw the Danube River become the principal artery of trade, eclipsing the Amber Road and other commercial routes. The redirection of investment to the Danubian forts saw the towns along the Amber Road growing slowly, though yet retaining the prosperity. The prolonged struggle between the Romans and the barbarians further left its mark on the towns along the Amber Road. Via Maris, literally Latin for the way of the sea, was an ancient highway used by the Romans and the Crusaders. The states controlling the Via Maris were in a position to grant access for trade to their own citizens and collect tolls from the outsiders to maintain the trade route. The name Via Maris is a Latin translation of a Hebrew phrase related to Isaiah. Due to the biblical significance of this ancient route, many attempts to find its present-day location have been made by Christian pilgrims. 13th century traveler and pilgrim Burchard of Mount Zion refers to the Via Maris route as a way leading along the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Trans-Saharan trade. Early Muslim writings confirmed that the people of West Africa operated a sophisticated network of trade, usually under the authority of a monarch who levied taxes and provided bureaucratic and military support to his kingdom. Sophisticated mechanisms for the economic and political development of the involved African areas were in place before Islam further strengthened trade, towns and government in Western Africa. The capital, court and trade of the region find mention in the works of scholar Abu Ubaid Abd Allah al-Bakri. The mainstay of the trans-Saharan trade was gold and salt. The powerful Saharan tribes, Berber in origin and later adapting to Muslim and Arab cultures, controlled the channels to Western Africa by making efficient use of horse-drawn vehicles and pack animals. The Songhair engaged in a struggle against the Saadi dynasty of Morocco over the control of the trans-Saharan trade, resulting in damage on both sides and a weak Moroccan victory, further strengthening the uninvolved Saharan tribes. Struggles and disturbances continued till the 14th century, by which the Mandé merchants were trading with the Hausa, between Lake Chad and the Niger. Newer trade routes developed following extension of trade, predominantly maritime routes. Roman India routes. The Ptolemaic dynasty had initiated Greco-Roman maritime trade contact with India using the Red Sea ports. The Roman historian Strabo mentions a vast increase in trade following the Roman annexation of Egypt, indicating that monsoon was known and manipulated for trade in his time. By the time of Augustus, up to 120 ships were setting sail every year from Myus Hormuz to India, trading in a diverse variety of goods. Arsino, Berenice Troglodytica and Myus Hormuz were the principal Roman ports involved in this maritime trading network, while the Indian ports included Barbaricum, Berigaza, Muziris and Arikamadu. The Indians were present in Alexandria, and the Christian and Jewish settlers from Rome continued to live in India long after the fall of the Roman Empire, which resulted in Rome's loss of the Red Sea ports, previously used to secure trade with India by the Greco-Roman world since the time of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Hanseatic trade. Shortly before the 12th century, the Germans played a relatively modest role in the North European trade. However, this was to change with the development of Hanseatic trade, as a result of which German traders became prominent in the Baltic and the North Sea regions. Following the death of Erik VI of Denmark, German forces attacked and sacked Denmark, bringing with them artisans and merchants under the new administration which controlled the Hansa regions. During the third quarter of the 14th century, the Hanseatic trade faced two major difficulties: economic conflict with the Flanders and hostilities with Denmark. These events led to the formation of an organized association of Hanseatic towns, which replaced the earlier Union of German Merchants. This new Hansa of the towns, aimed at protecting interests of the merchants and trade, was prominent for the next 150 years. Philippe Dollinger associates the downfall of the Hansa to a new alliance between Lübeck, Hamburg and Bremen, which outshadowed the older institution. He further sets the date of dissolution of the Hansa at 1630 and concludes that the Hansa was almost entirely forgotten by the end of the 18th century. Scholar Georg Friedrich Sartorius published the first monograph regarding the community in the early years of the 19th century. For the Varangians to the Greek, the trade route from the Varangians to the Greeks was a trade route that connected Scandinavia, Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire. The route allowed traders along the route to establish a direct prosperous trade with Byzantium, and prompted some of them to settle in the territories of present-day Belarus, Russia and Ukraine. The route began in Scandinavian trading centers such as Birka, Hedeby, and Gotland, crossed the Baltic Sea, entered the Gulf of Finland, followed the Neva River into the Lake Ladoga. Then it followed the Volkhov River upstream past the towns of Stara Ladoga and Veliki Novgorod, crossed Lake Ilmen, and up the Lovet River. For that, ships had to be portaged to the Dnieper River near Gniezdovo. A second route from the Baltic to the Dnieper was along the western Dvina between the Lovet and the Dnieper in the Smolensk region, and along the Kaspia River to Gniezdovo. Along the Dnieper, the route crossed several major rapids and passed through Kiev, and after entering the Black Sea followed its west coast to Constantinople. Maritime republics. Mediterranean trade. The economic growth of Europe around the year 1000, together with the lack of safety on the mainland trading routes, eased the development of major commercial routes along the coast of the Mediterranean. The growing independence of some coastal cities gave them a leading role in this commerce. Maritime republics of Venice, Genoa, Amalfi, Pisa and Republic of Ragusa developed their own empires in the Mediterranean shores. For the 8th until the 15th century, they held the monopoly of European trade with the Middle East. The silk and spice trade, involving spices, incense, herbs, drugs and opium, made these Mediterranean city-states phenomenally rich. Spices were among the most expensive and demanded products of the Middle Ages. They were all imported from Asia and Africa. Muslim traders, mainly descendants of Arab sailors from Yemen and Oman, dominated maritime routes throughout the Indian Ocean, tapping source regions in the Far East and shipping for trading emporiums in India, westward to Ormuz in Persian Gulf and Jeddah in the Red Sea. For their overland routes led to the Mediterranean coasts. Venetian merchants distributed then the goods through Europe until the rise of the Ottoman Empire. That eventually led to the fall of Constantinople in 1453, barring Europeans from important combined land-sea routes. spice route. As trade between India and the Greco-Roman world increased, spices became the main import from India to the Western world, bypassing silk and other commodities. The Indian commercial connection with Southeast Asia proved vital to the merchants of Arabia and Persia during the 7th and 8th centuries. The Abbasids used Alexandria, Damietta, Aden and Saraf as entry ports to India and China. Merchants arriving from India in the port city of Aden paid tribute in form of musk, camphor, ambergris and sandalwood to Ibn Ziyad, the Sultan of Yemen. Mollucan products shipped across the ports of Arabia to the Near East passed through the ports of India and Sri Lanka. Indian exports of spices find mention in the works of Ibn Qudad, Bay al-Ghafiqi, Ishaq bin Imaran and al-Kalkashandi. After reaching either the Indian or the Sri Lankan ports, spices were sometimes shipped to East Africa, where they were used for many purposes, including burial rites. On the orders of Manuel I of Portugal, 4 vessels under the command of navigator Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope, continuing to the eastern coast of Africa to Malindi to sail across the Indian Ocean to Calicut. The wealth of the Indies was now open for the Europeans to explore. The Portuguese Empire was one of the early European empires to grow from spice trade.